Trump is struggling, partly thanks to himself, because I think that he's spending too much time on the golf courses and too much time spouting nonsense. But at least he's trying to do the right thing. He speaks with Putin. He has thus far managed to avoid war with Iran.
But what he does understand is that nuclear war would be a disaster.
Yeah.
And he's putting an enormous effort into that. He's running a parallel operation with Witkoff and some others. Do you know who they just assigned to work with Witkoff on the Middle East? Tony Blair. From the quartet.
Trump did that.
They couldn't have picked the worst person.
The word that's coming out from some people who have more contacts inside Russia than I do is that on the Russian talk shows, they're saying that the first country that will be hit if this continues will be Britain.
Today, Russians have the means to completely flatten Great Britain. We are all at risk because of a very, very small cabal of people who will just not give up.
We need to liberate ourselves from these warmongering oligarchs that are out to destroy our lives.
Using Wi-Fi without NordVPN could mean sharing your private stuff with more people than you think. NordVPN. Online security starts with a click.
When tyranny becomes law, rebellion becomes a duty. So said Thomas Jefferson. Go to bit.ly/lawful tax protest or bit.ly/make-war-history and find out why it is a criminal offence to pay central government or local government taxes in the UK. Hey Alex, hey Harley. Thank you so much, guys. Thank you. It's Friday the 6th of June. We're recording this at 1933 British summer time. Harley, do you want to say where you are and where people can find you? And
I'm in the heart of the war zone in Potsdam, Germany, where the German government is making sure we're war ready, that they're stocking the subways with, fewer drunk people. And people can find me at the LaRoucheOrganization.com.
yes, and I will link to that, and also your X. I'll link to your X and LaRouche's X, although you don't use your X very much.
As you could see, it was hard for me to even find the link for you today, so I have trouble when it comes to these things.
It's always the same link, and it's always in the same place.
I know, I forgot where it was.
Get one of your kids to come and do it.
It's not a joke, it's true.
Alex, what about yourself?
Well, I am on X at Naked Hedgie, 2 publications on Substack. One is for traders and investors, daily trend following newsletter called iSystem Trend Following, and my personal Substack called Alex Krainer Substack.
Yes. And Alex, this is almost like the Crypto Rich and Alex Krainer channel. I'm blessed. I've done so many videos with you. There was one with you and Tom a few days ago. Then there was one that I haven't put out yet with an astrologer doing mundane astrology on the Bank of England and the ECB and the euro and the pound and Keir Starmer. And then there's this one with Harley. And then there's one in a few days' time with Dr. Rainer Rothfuss. And then a few weeks, sometime after that with E.M. Burlingame. And,
You're bringing Reiner on again, huh?
Yeah. With Alex. He asked if he could come on with Alex.
Oh, great. He's speaking tomorrow at a rally in Schrobenhausen, which is the city where the Taurus missiles are produced. And he's joining our organization in a rally to leaflet the city to tell them, you better stop this or you're going to be flattened by the Russian missiles.
Yep. Okay, so gentlemen, where shall we begin?
Maybe with some fresh news. I don't know if there's been stuff going on in the world.
Well, the bromance is over between Trump and Musk, but I don't know if that's just a play by both of them. I've no idea.
Yeah, I'm suspecting the same, but I don't. Given everything that's going on, I don't think it's even that important. I think that we are at the hour of maximum danger. The British and the Europeans are completely rabid and insane. They are lusting for an escalation of war against a nuclear power. They're doing everything they can think of to escalate it. And So the Germans want to transfer, well, it's probably not fair to say the Germans, but Merz's government wants to transfer Taurus missiles to Ukraine for deep strikes into Russia. Some people believe that the missiles are already there. They're also allegedly helping Ukraine develop long-range missiles domestically, German engineers, right? The British apparently have let it be known to Ukrainians that they are prepared to help them develop nuclear weapons that they can lob over into Russia. So it's clear that they are not ready to cut their losses and declare victory and move on to something else. So I think that the only reason why we've not all been incinerated yet is the restraint and cool head of Mr. Putin and his government in Moscow. So that's where we're at. We are very fortunate that we have Donald Trump in the White House rather than Kamala Harris.
Yeah.
Because if she were in the White House, I think that we'd be in a world of trouble. Trump is struggling, obviously. Things are difficult for him, and partly thanks to himself, because I think that he's spending too much time on the golf courses and too much time spouting nonsense. But at least he's trying to do the right thing. He speaks with Putin. He has thus far managed to avoid war with Iran and has been more flexible than I expected in his negotiations with Iran. So I think at least on these two very, very important fronts, there's reason for cautious optimism. But the other side, the likes of Merz, Macron, Keir Starmer, their governments, and a good chunk of the US political establishment are just relentlessly pushing for an escalation, which is so insane that it beggars belief. But, this is where we are.
Okay. Harley, before I come to you, and you can respond to this, Alex, I'm going to push back. Okay?
Well, you're welcome to be wrong, so go ahead.
That's very generous of you, Alex. The thing is, right, this is an argument that was presented to me. And one of the things I noticed for myself, because I have so many conversations with both of you and also with Tom Luongo, and I have a similar mindset that we need to have a negotiated peace, right? We need to have peace. We need to stop. Politicians and banksters need to stop sending other people's children for whatever disputes they have going on. But Putin is a madman. He can't be allowed to get away with invading a sovereign country, and therefore the NATO nations need to stand united with Ukraine. Otherwise, we're just going to allow his violation of international law go unpunished.
Rich, if I could just have a small suggestion, I think that you can acquire those little devices for your podcasting. And you can press a button and get canned laughter. So when you see something like that, you can just press the button and what do you think?
Well, there's my authentic laughter at your humor. You making fun of me, right? But people do actually believe that. They stand by that. We can't let Putin is a madman because of the way the mainstream media paints him. They don't actually get the warmongers that are behind him, and that how Putin has waged this war is a world away from what the NATO did to Libya, or tried to do to Syria, or did to Iraq.
Oh, back when they were bombing Libya with fluffy pillows and somehow managed to kill 40,000 people.
Yeah, and just destroying everything, right? And what they've done to Libya. He's not waging the war that way, right? But nevertheless, it was still wrong of him to invade this sovereign nation, and we can't let him. Western European nations, that we have to stand by our democratic principles and our values of, was the one, unity, diversity, inclusivity, and resist Putin's genocidal, imperialistic intentions.
I think that anybody who actually believes this should probably volunteer, get a uniform, get a gun, and go stand up for those principles and those values. Why not?
I was going to say go seek counseling.
Or that, yes.
Okay, but
the irony here, which is missed by most people, is if you take your pushing back, the flip side of that is, as you pointed out, what happened in Libya, what happened in Yugoslavia, what happened in Syria. Who are the terrorists? Who are the ones who are supporting the slaughter of innocents? And I think, just to add a couple of points to what Alex said, I thought Alex gave a very thorough assessment of where things stand. A couple of things that just came out. Lukyanov, who's a leading spokesman for the Russian foreign services and intelligence, he's one of the leaders of the Valdai Club, gave a talk today where he just said, we have not retaliated yet. The bombs from last night, that's not what we're talking about. Then you have this General Reshetnikov.
These are Russians that you're quoting here?
These are Russians, yeah.
Okay.
Close to Putin.
Okay.
Reshetnikov is a former top intelligence guy. And what he talked about is the British role. And he quoted Starmer's speech from the other day, where Starmer talked about being battle ready, using innovation to accelerate the pace of readiness. And I read a funny comment from someone who said, if we can accelerate the pace of industrial development, why are we doing that for weapons? Why don't we do it for the National Health Service? Why don't we do it for education? Why don't we do that for infrastructure? So what Reshetnikov said is that the British will likely be included at some point in the near future as the leading force in pushing this war to continue. Now, there's also the whole question of the CIA, because as we know, the CIA, as soon as the coup took place in 2014, sent in and set up anywhere between 15 and 25 units in Ukraine, and this is according to a New York Times story, to coordinate the war against Russia. And it was coordinated not in Ukraine, but in Wiesbaden, which is the old American military headquarters. Now, one other bit of fairly interesting report I got today, the people who helped write the Starmer speech, one of them is none other than Fiona Hill, Alex, I'm sure you know who she is. She's
an American, isn't she? Or she was involved with the Ukraine impeachment?
She's a Brit.
British.
She was involved in the Ukraine impeachment somehow.
Yeah, exactly. She was right at the center of the first impeachment case. And she, along with Lord Robertson, I think he's the former defense minister in Britain. Anyway, its top people sat down over a 3 or 4 day period and came up with this plan. And, it reads like something that you'd get from Inspector Clouseau if he were running the British military. There's no way it'll work. It's delusional. And yet they came out, I think in the parliament yesterday, saying that this has to be in place before 2028, by the time that the Russians will be ready to invade Britain. So when you talk about delusional, when you talk about people who have no sense of reality, who on the one hand say Putin is the most brutal person in the world, and on the other hand, they're threatening him to a chicken game over nuclear war. It makes no sense.
Yeah, and I think what people don't know, because I've been following Ukrainian politics since 2014, the Maidan coup, and what's kind of absurd is I know more about Ukrainian politics than I do about Pakistani politics. So I've been following Ukrainian politics much, much closer. So there was a Maidan coup, and then long before that, there was, and I know you posted an article today, and you talked about it in a video, I think we did with Tom recently, Operation Unthinkable, which came about at the end of the Second World War, which was the strategy promoted by the British, I understand, that how they were going to destroy the Soviet Union, because Soviet Union then, Russia now, is the most resource-rich country in the world.
Well, they didn't say that in Operation Unthinkable, but they drafted a plan to attack Russia along with the United States, Polish troops, and German troops. And the really weird part about this is that this document was presented to Winston Churchill in May of 1945. So it was shortly after FDR died or was killed, assassinated, and in the midst of the battles still going on against Nazi Germany, the war was still on, and the British were already scheming to attack Russia. And in their documents, they pretty much always spell out Russia. They usually don't say Soviet Union. And it tells you that their priority was not, even though they were formally allied with Russia against Nazi Germany, it's very clear that their priority is to defeat Russia, not the Nazi Germany.
Yeah.
And then, they lay out a whole bunch of things that are, when you read them, things like, gosh, this is eerily similar to what we're living today. And it's similar in the sense that the mindset of the British establishment hasn't changed one bit. And in Operation Unthinkable, they say, okay, kind of, we have two options. One of them would be a quick surprise attack against Russia. Eisenhower killed the idea right away, so it didn't go forward. But they thought that a quick surprise attack might allow them to reach their political objective, but only temporarily. And their political objective they spelled out as subduing. How do you subduing Russia to our will? Subduing is not the right word.
Subjugating Russia to our will, subordinating Russia to our will.
Yeah, something like that. They didn't use either one, but to that effect. It wasn't that word, but something to that effect. Anyway, and then they say that Plan B, well, not Plan B, but the other option would be to prepare a total war on Russia, for which they need to deploy the vast resources of the United States in Europe and to get all of British European allies on board. And they say for this plan to work, it's going to take a long, long time. They didn't specify how much time, but the long, long time, you can infer from the documents that they're talking about decades. So, 80 years later, here we are, and things that are going on seem almost like they kept that plan, and they just kind of waited for circumstances to mature to kick it off. And this war, this proxy war in Ukraine, is it.
Well, the planning of empires often is in these longer arcs, because they assume they're going to continue to exist. And if they don't, the whims of the voters mean nothing to them. They know they're going to be there. It's interesting when you look back at that, because the other aspect of that was Bertrand Russell was proposing using the hydrogen weapons that the United States had, the hydrogen bomb, before Russia got it, to preemptively bomb the Russian nuclear program. Russell, the so-called peacenik. And this was one of the other aspects of that. I had an interesting invitation today to address a veterans conference. Today is the 81st anniversary of D-Day, when the American and Allied forces crossed through the British Channel into Normandy and began the final assault on Nazi Germany from the west, while the Soviets had been pounding them from the east. And it was interesting because they asked me to situate the present circumstance from the context of the Kennedy-Cuban Missile Crisis and the period immediately after that. And I looked into it, and it was really fascinating. Kennedy was operating through something called the Executive Committee, EXCOM, which was National Security Council, Intelligence Services, and the Joint Chiefs of Staff. They unanimously said, nuke Cuba and Russia. This was in October 1962. Kennedy said, what, are you serious? And they said, well, this is our strategy. And they produced this document called the Joint Strategic Capabilities Plan, which had as its first action 170 nuclear bombs hitting Moscow. and then a smaller number hitting a number of other cities. That was the first plan. This was presented by the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Chairman Lyman Lemnitzer. Curtis LeMay was cheerleading it. And afterwards, Kennedy pulled aside his brother and one or two other people, and he said, "And we call ourselves the human race." And it was literally Kennedy himself as an individual who stopped the nuclear war that was being planned by these lunatics. And it shows something interesting, which is that they thought they were the ones who could call the shots. They ignored the idea of an elected president being able to do that. Now, Donald Trump is no John Kennedy. And I don't mean that simply to deride Trump, but to point out that Kennedy was somewhat extraordinary, who rose above his Cold War persona, his father's gangsterism, and all these other things. So actually fight for peace. And that's what, after the Cuban Missile Crisis, he kept doing. When you look at Trump, his first term was dominated by these neocons, by the war hawks in both parties. Now, it's interesting, and I know you paid attention to this, Alex. Who was in Kiev the day this operation was launched? It was Lindsey Graham and Richard Blumenthal, the leading Democrat and Republican hawks from the U.S. Senate.
I think Mike Pompeo was there as well in a private capacity.
Yeah, he gave a speech there also.
Yeah.
The only one missing was Bolton.
But he was there in spirit. He sent his lackeys, his spirit warriors. Yes, let's go and send other people's children to war.
And the point that I was making is that Kennedy made it not just a one-time prevention, but he said, look, we need a sustainable peace. And in his famous June 10th, 1963 commencement address at American University, he said, we're not talking about a Pax Americana, an American peace. We're talking about a peace for all nations for all time. And that's what I think the Russian intent has been with this idea of indivisible security, that every nation has legitimate security concerns that should be addressed by all other nations. And that never happened. That never happened in the case after the fall of the Soviet Union. And that's why we're in this situation today. Now, if you ask me, I don't know that Trump has quite the grasp of this situation, but what he does understand is that nuclear war would be a disaster.
Yeah.
And he's putting an enormous effort into that. He's running a parallel operation with Witkoff and some others, but it's not enough because, I'll tell you the weakness, the two weaknesses. One, economic policy, but the other weakness is, do you know who they just assigned to work with Witkoff on the Middle East? Tony Blair. From the quartet.
Trump did that.
They couldn't have picked the worst person.
I don't think Trump made the choice. Trump is not a Tony Blair fan.
He did such a great job as a peace envoy, I remember.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Tony Blair, I like to say all roads lead to London, but if you need a person there, it's all road leads to Tony Blair. He's exactly at the center of everything going on now.
Yeah.
I don't know if he's deeply involved in Ukraine, but he's very deeply involved in the Middle East, in Israel, in Syria. And he's stirring the pot.
Well, he also played a leading role in the Balkans.
That's right.
And in Libya, it was Blair who led the way, who convinced the British and the French that they had to get Obama to lead from behind.
And in domestically, he's the one who's been pushing for biometric digital ID in order to control the rampant immigration, which they've been encouraging and facilitating.
Well, of course, you create a problem and then you're the one who can solve it.
Yeah. I just kind of imagine, because I could be, I am an immigrant, but I've been here a long, long time. He said, well, did you come over on the boat? I mean, listen to my accent, really? That's my ID.
One other point on Trump, which I think is a weakness, is that he has this idea that strength is the key, that you have to appear strong. And this was how they were playing Kennedy. The idea when Kennedy refused to give backup to the Bay of Pigs invasion, the military went out and said, Kennedy's weak. He submitted to the communists. He gave up. He gave in. And the idea that if Kennedy didn't blow up Cuba, then he was again appeasing the Soviets and the communists. And he said, I'd rather in the long run be known as someone who negotiated with them than the one who provoked them. And he had this one quote that was in Bobby Kennedy's notes. He said, we have to give Khrushchev an honorable way out. You don't want to put him in a situation from which it would provoke precipitous action. That's what the strategy is for Putin, for the West in dealing with Putin, to try and create a situation where Putin will blow up, will just react angrily and do something that will give them an excuse. But to do what? This goes back to this whole idea of Russia as the major enemy of British imperial interests. And this was a fight to get the United States to accept that. The US did accept it. That's what the whole McCarthy period was about, the post-World War II, the Korean War, and so on. And so we have all these ghosts of the past that are shaping the future, and we can't seem to shake them.
Yeah. And I think what serves people, in order to inform their analysis so that it's accurate, is we have to keep zooming out. We have to keep zooming out because there's much, much more at play. And the great thing for me about talking to both of you is the historical perspectives that you bring in. And one of the things that's really clear to me, it seems to me that Putin, despite how he's presented in the mainstream media, he's not hot-headed. After the assault with the drone swarm a few days ago, I would imagine that NATO powers would have right, we're in there, and just blown everybody to smithereens. Putin hasn't done that. He's not even launched a couple of Oreshniks. I think a couple of Oreshniks would be enough to terrify NATO because they got no defense against it. And it's not nuclear power, but as nuclear arms, but it's as powerful. So, Harley, you said something right at the beginning, I think before we started recording, about the warnings that Putin is giving to Britain and about the role that the Russians are saying that Britain is playing. Say more about that, please.
Well, the briefing that was given by Zakharova, the woman who's the spokesperson for the foreign ministry, the last 3 days has been Britain, Britain, Britain. And what she said is that we're tracking this. We know how it's working. The word that's coming out from some people who have more contacts inside Russia than I do is that on the Russian talk shows, they're saying that the first country that will be hit if this continues will be Britain. And you mentioned the Oreshnik missile. This is actually a fairly clean way of making a point because it's unstoppable and extremely powerful, but it's not nuclear. And this is being discussed on the Russian media talk shows. So Gilbert Doctorow, who pays close attention to these things, has been saying that there's some of the podcasters in Russia are saying, why is Putin waiting? Why is he waiting? And of course, everyone in Russia knows that he's waiting because he doesn't want to start a nuclear war. And when you think about what Starmer is now talking about, upgrading Britain's nuclear capability and doing it with Ukraine, I mean, how much more provocative can you be? And this is the Russians are not stupid. They not only listen to what's being said today, but they're mapping it onto the British geopolitical doctrine of the last 100 or 200 years. They have a very clear sense of what was behind the Crimean War in the 1860s. They understand the commitment of the British to pit Germany against Russia in the two wars of the 20th century. So they're very clear on these things. Now, they're also very clear on appreciating that Trump is trying to do something. And, with Trump, there's so much of his policies that are theater. But I don't think this is theater. And I think Putin and others have concluded that they can work with Trump. And I was not surprised that Trump called Putin on Monday. In fact, my Monday morning update was titled, "Trump, call Putin ASAP."
He watches your channel, as we all should.
Right, sure. But then what did he do yesterday? He called Xi Jinping. And with all the talk coming from the military and the neocons and others that we have to confront China, Trump has a different view. Same thing with Iran. Now, we're at a turning point in history, because if the US sticks to this, then it means that Europe either has to change its policies or Europe will become an enemy of the United States. But not just the United States, a potential alliance of the US, Russia, and China, which is moving in a certain direction on economic policy. So I think this is much bigger than most people know. It's certainly bigger in Putin's mind than we've got to get revenge. And that's unfortunately the way most military strategists think. We've got to do something to show we're tough. Putin doesn't think that way.
No, he doesn't. He just doesn't, which is actually real strength, I think. Just doesn't need to prove it. It's there, it's obvious, and he can restrain himself. But if Britain and Germany are going to help Ukraine develop nuclear arms and develop long-range missiles domestically, well, that won't be a problem for Russia to take those factories out of action. And they've said as much. Then what? Alex?
Well, people are not stupid. I think that by now, even these morons in the West understand that if they're going to build something important and sensitive, that it has to go deep underground. So I wouldn't expect them to build it somewhere clear in sight with with crosshairs painted on top of the hangar.
Right.
They're not going to make it easy for the Russians. But still, what's the point? Because escalating this to a total war means mutual destruction. I think that the fantasies of being able to win in a nuclear war are psychotic delusions. And I find it amazing. I find it absolutely amazing that this cabal in the West is not capable of making the connection with history to say that, we've been trying to do this for more than 200 years. And even when we're strong and Russia is weak, we still lose. Today, Russia is not weak. How about we do something else? If you're trying to do something that doesn't work again and again and again at a huge cost, then maybe at some point you say, maybe there's other things in life. Maybe we can develop domestic economy. Maybe we can become a successful country like Switzerland, for example, prosperous, well-ordered, neutral, independent, sovereign. Why not try that? What's wrong with that? Why do you have to, there's the obsession in Britain about defeating Russia is so rabid and so insane, so completely insane, that I think it needs like a psychiatric evaluation. Because, the Russia is not a threat to Britain. Apart from what people are talking about on talk shows, there has been zero threats directed from Russia towards Great Britain. In fact, until recently, I think the first time I heard Russians even mention Britain was at the moment of Nord Stream pipeline bombings, and they didn't even say Great Britain; they said Anglo-Saxons. So that term, but they didn't say it in a threatening way. They said it. We believe that they're behind this, and so to be constantly obsessed with taking total war against Russia with no holds barred, nuclear, whatever, destroy the earth, destroy all life on earth. And undeterred by the fact that they always lose and that they will probably lose again. And then today, Russians have the means to completely flatten Great Britain, to turn it into a parking lot. They still want to do it. We are all at risk because of a very, very small cabal of people who will just not give up. And I think that it will be time. Well, it's past time that we just take them out.
Yep.
I don't know how to do that, but it needs to be done.
Well, we need to liberate ourselves from these warmongering oligarchs that are out to destroy our lives. But I would say, Alex, that I believe that they think, the oligarchs, the elites, the warmongering profiteers, the banksters, that they're immune from any fallout, and they have no compunction about sacrificing other people's children for their own hubris. And they have no other alternative because of the slow rolling sovereign debt crisis. What else can Britain and the European Union do? They're going to collapse unless they're able to get some more collateral, as you have trained me. And then the other thing that seems so absurd is they've got no energy. They've got no. How are we going to build nuclear armaments and long range missiles? We have to print. Germany will have to print euros to buy the tungsten and the nickel and the aluminium and the iron from Russia.
I keep having to explain to you, Rich, that our true strength is in our unity. So, our values. Sorry, diversity, inclusiveness,
and
so energy schmenergy. What are you talking about?
This is where
raw commodities, right?
What Rich is talking about, the element there that's true, is they combine the worst qualities of arrogance and sociopathic behavior. And they have the power, they think, to control the way people think, because they all think in the same way. But they have a contempt for human beings. And they see themselves as, to use the term that may not be the popular term, but they see themselves as a master race. And that's going to be ultimately their shortcoming. And I think, look, we just had another election, the election in Poland, which should have been a strong vote for the European Union, and it wasn't. The Romania situation, Serbia, Slovakia, Greece, even Spain, in some ways, Spain is wavering on these things. Maloney is not in on it. So you really have, you had four stooges. If you include Tusk in it, then you have the Macron, Merz, Starmer, and Tusk from Poland. But that's an increasingly small unity to fight against the whole world. And we just had a conference, the Schiller Institute, and we had one of the speakers was Naledi Pandor, the former foreign minister of South Africa. And what she said is that what the Western establishment keeps underestimating is that there are hundreds of millions of people who are just beginning to get a sense of a better future. And they're not going to be deterred by the likes of Starmer and Macron. And I think that's a point that people don't realize, that we have allies to fight against the warmongers. And instead we get part of geopolitics is you manipulate everyone against everyone else. So the immigration issue, the whole point there is, why are people immigrating to Europe? Because their countries are being destroyed by the West. They have no place to go. You want to stop the immigration? Have a policy to build up these countries. Get the International Monetary Fund out. Let them use their own raw materials for their own development of sovereign wealth. These are simple things, except for the fact that you have sociopaths who are controlling the media and controlling the so-called narrative. And the hard thing for me is to, when I talk to the two of you, it's a rational discussion. They're human beings who combine empathy for the human race and a certain sense of creative potential in yourself to act on that. You don't find that very often. But that's something we have to figure out, how to manufacture empathy, how to develop empathy in the population.
Yeah. Well, I think the thing about you don't find that enough is because people don't question. They don't question. They just largely accept what they're told. They don't go and search stuff out. So then they end up rolling up their sleeves, lining up to take a wonderful, wonderful, safe and effective medical concoction. I think that was just a really great example of people's willingness, yeah, sure, the government say that I can have this thing inside me that has no long-term benefits, no long-term results. Sure, no problem. I trust big government. Okay, sorry, that's me getting on my soapbox, right?
If let me interrupt just for 1 second, because I meant to ask
You
Harley
interrupt
a
in a sort of
question.
inclusive way without creating disunity, Alex.
I'm sorry, don't. Oh, well, I apologize. I'll try to do that in the future. Harley,
More
forgive me, but
sensitive.
before you were speaking about that plan to drop 170 nukes of Moscow, and you said the name of that plan, Joint Strategic something.
Capabilities plan. Joint Strategic Capabilities Plan. It was drafted by the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and it was to have a preemptive strike against the Soviet Union. And it was an updated one on the one you were talking about, and the Russell plan, and they had to keep updating it. And this was the one they presented to Kennedy, and Kennedy looked at them, and afterwards he said, "It was all I could do to keep from blowing my top."
Wow. I suspect that plan is going to get researched and looked at by Alex, and it will show up in one of his Substack articles. So watch out for that. Make sure you subscribe.
I think that's absolutely fascinating. I mean, I don't know where they make these people, like Lemnitzer and Curtis LeMay. It's just amazing that they must have a special factory for defective human beings somewhere.
That's where Tony Blair came out of.
Yeah. Tony Blair also. And, I think it's very fascinating. But, I think that we spoke about this, one of the recent podcasts we had, Rich, about these boarding schools in the UK.
Yeah.
Where it seems that there's like a process of identifying these damaged kids, and maybe breaking them emotionally and psychologically into losing their moral compass. And so you have these people like Tony Blair and Boris Johnson and David Cameron and Keir Starmer, and there seems to be an inexhaustible supply of them. Well, maybe not inexhaustible, because at the same time you see that they keep recycling them,
and the quality is getting lower and lower.
And yes, exactly. And I think that the reason why they need to keep recycling them is because you need to get a complete psychopath, but competent and intelligent and articulate.
A controllable psychopath. And one thing to add to the mix, and then I want to take it back to politics, is pedophilia. How that's used in the same way as boarding school is used, because then you abuse these children, you raise them, and they have no empathy. They're so damaged and removed from themselves.
Pedophilia is part of those boarding schools.
Yeah, but I'm saying that the boarding schools fits for Britain. Pedophilia is universal. They'll use that everywhere. Yeah. Now, moving on to Poland, because you mentioned the Polish election. I forget the name of the new president, but I'm not sure. I've heard that he's globalist. Is he? Isn't he?
Well, in his campaign, he was accused of being too soft on Russia, and he said Poland has no cause to fight with Russia. Now, those are fighting words for the European Union. And, the fact that he even went that far, he didn't say he supports Putin, but he said we should talk to them. And he also raised the question of the Poles getting a little tired of bailing out Ukraine, of caring for the Ukrainian emigres. All the signs were there, but given the control of NATO and so on, it wasn't an open break as it would have been with Romania. But what I'm pointing out is, look at the situation in Germany. Merz right now is at 24% in the polls, and who knows whether that's accurate or not. The alternative for Deutschland is now at 26%. There was an interview that Alex Vidal did the other day, which was really interesting, because she's usually trying to portray herself as being calm and rational because she doesn't want to get this extremist label. So this interviewer said, well, what do you think about the European Union's policy toward Ukraine, and including the German policy? And she said, well, it's insane. And it was a very open statement from her. She wouldn't have done that unless their polling would have shown that the German people are ready to take up that kind of discussion. And I have a sense that there are going to be all kinds of rallies in the next days. There's a religious holiday next week, anti-war demonstrations gearing up. Germany's a very strange place because the people tend to seem to be very passive and under control. And yet you can see a kind of tension and anger, including in families. There are 5 or 6 families in my neighborhood that have just broken up. The couple split up. And it's monetary problems. It's a sense of identity, not knowing what to do. So you can see the effect of the incapacity of a country to take care of its population in individual families.
Mm. Which it's great, Harley, because I think we're all impacted, and then it shows like the fractal nature
Yeah.
of human discourse. That we have this war going on, but I do liken it to gangsters struggling over turf, and we just happen to be the collateral, and we just want to get on with our lives, in this city, but the city happens to be Europe right now, where they're struggling over. And then I just want to remind people, I'm recording a video very soon, in a few days' time, with Alex Krainer and Dr. Rainer Rothfuss, who is a member of the IFD and joined the IFD out of a commitment to peace, because they're one of these far-right organizations that believe in peace.
Well, Rainer, his background is that he's a professor of geopolitics.
Yes.
And he understands in the broader picture what the problem is. And what he said he's fighting for in the AfD is that Germany become a bridge to Russia and Eurasia.
Mm.
Extremist right-wing rhetoric like that.
A Nazi, a total Nazi.
Total
and
Nazi.
He's for peace. Appalling.
The worst. Now,
Communist.
Harley, what are the odds about a collapse of the current German government? How likely is that the coalition falls apart? And could you hurry it up along, please?
Well, I think it's going to depend on what happens with the budget. For Merz to get the money he wants for defense spending, he's going to have to cut back further on education and healthcare. And there are very troubling signs in the school system. The Kita, the kindergarten where my daughter goes, they don't have enough teachers anymore. They used to try and have one teacher for every 12 to 15 kids. Now it's 25 kids. And if you know something about 4 and 5 and 6-year-olds, the teacher dropout rate is incredible.
Yeah.
And this is a good school. It's an evangelical school, but they don't have the funds. The state funds are late. They're not coming in. And you have on the left the Sarah Wagenknecht organization, which is saying invest in the people, invest in education, invest in infrastructure. That's what the AfD is saying. So then you have the Bundesverfassungsschutz, the security force, doing everything possible to keep the so-called left and the so-called right apart. And because the issues are the same. It's like the United States, for example, in 2010, you had Obamacare and you had on the Occupy Wall Street and the anti-tax, the tax resistors. They were supposedly left and right, but when they got together, they realized they had the same concern. And I think that will ultimately be the question of what happens in Germany, because the Social Democrats are collapsed. The Christian Democrats are heading in that direction. There are people in the Christian Democrats and the Christian Social Union that are saying, let's link up with the AfD. But the AfD is saying, we don't want to work with the war hawks. So there's no solution in the present political environment. And unfortunately, I think the German people will quietly go along until there's an explosion. But it would be better to have an explosion of empathy and thinking to catalyze some changes. But Merz is the worst. Look, what Merz represents, he was fighting with Merkel for the party leadership at the beginning of the century, and he lost. So what did he do? He went and signed up to be the head of BlackRock in Germany and was involved in the worst forms of speculation, of concentration of wealth. And that's his view of the world. And then he saw an opportunity to come back in, and he did. And now he's the chancellor. He doesn't know what to do. He changes his policy more often than he changes his socks. And this is a country that if Germany doesn't function, the EU doesn't function.
Yeah. Well, the silver lining is that the EU is not long for this world. I can't wait for it to collapse. It is not long for this world. Alex, anything for you?
Well, it's hard to know what to think, but everything taken all together, I still remain optimistic about the future.
You can see it written all over your face.
You can see it. I think that, as I mentioned before, we have one variable in the social equation that never existed before, and that is the internet and the social media. And the fact that we can have conversations like this, and then many people will see them, and then they are shared, they are discussed. Once upon a time, it was you pretty much had radio and the television and the newspapers, and so you knew what you knew, but you couldn't. Today people reach into the social media and get information instantly about anything, and people know stuff. Of course, if we all come across people who are still clueless, and that feels a little bit frustrating. And then people say like, people are sheep, so there's no hope. But that's not the case anymore. That really is not the case. They're sheep, but maybe at the time of World War I and World War II, you had one Ezra Pound to 1 million people. Used to Smolens, people who understood what was going on. You could name them by name today. There were so few. Today, it's a whole percentage of the population, and I don't know what that percentage is, but I think there's a small percentage that has a fairly good grasp of what's going on, but you have a very large percentage of people who think like something's not right.
Yeah.
I don't know what it is, but something's very badly wrong. And guess what they do then? Well, they don't turn on their CNN. They go to X, they go to YouTube, they watch podcasts like this, they watch Jimmy Dore, Judge Andrew Napolitano, and everybody who appears there.
Alex Jones, George Galloway gets over 3 million views on his show.
There you go. Isn't that insane?
Yeah.
So I think that there's no telling what impact that might have, because that's never happened before. But I think there's no chance that it will have no impact. And so I think that the farther the game goes, the farther we go into the uncharted territory, the more this element is going to have influence on the development of events. And when you come down to the basics, human beings all share the same basic motivations in life. They want to live a good life, they want freedom, they want prosperity, they want good jobs, they want a peaceful society, they want safe street, good schools, good hospitals, good doctors. They want to spend time with their friends, socializing, eat good food. Everywhere in the world, it's the same thing, and they want to love their children. And we are confronted with people who absolutely hate us, who hate children, who want to dominate and turn us into hackable animals. I just don't see how they will win. They can't. The best they can do is to destroy the world. But even at that, they can't push the buttons. They have to rely on a hierarchy of people that they want to serve them. And that hierarchy of people includes many normal people who do have children, who do think like the 99.99% of everybody. And when you tell them, launch this nuclear missile, they might say, wait a minute, why would you do that? They might say no. And we know now from concrete examples, from concrete experiences, that it's happened very many times in the past that, the top brass gave an order, we're going to do this. And then, the lower ranks in the military said, sir, we can't do that. That doesn't make sense. And they'll refuse. They'll refuse to follow orders. And so a lot of things that might have happened never happened. And I think that this, in the end, is the problem, that they cannot solve. They cannot solve it unless they really turn us into hackable animals. And I don't see that happening either.
Let me just give you one quick example of what you're talking about, because it's partly what feeds my optimism. The situation in East Germany in 1989, where starting with small numbers of people, 10 people, coming to the Nikolaikirche in Leipzig, with candles and banners, surrounded by phalanxes of Stasi and military people. And it seemed like a minor inconvenience. And yet they kept doing it. And after a few weeks, Honecker was told by his Secret Service that they're starting to get support. And he said, well, keep an eye on it. And then all of a sudden, the 10 people turned into 100. And a week later, it was 1,000. And Honecker said, look, we've got to do something about this. And he gave the orders that next week, break it up. But the next week, there were 10,000. And the German police didn't go in and attack them. And shortly after that, the wall came down and Honecker was dying in a hospital in Chile. So there is something about the human spirit. You can do a lot of damage to people, but sometimes that spirit of rebellion comes through. And what you have to hope is that rebellion has some higher principles that are able to craft a solution as opposed to just rage. And that's why these podcasts are so important in these discussions, and why I always make the time to do them, because I think not that I know so much or that I'm so great, but just giving people a hope, a sense that there are people out there who are thinking about how we make things better.
Yes. Well, Harley, I so appreciate you and you, Alex, giving up the time to have this conversation. And there's one thing you said that I disagree with, Harley, which is you said that sometimes the human spirit comes through, something like that. No, it always does. It always does.
All right, that was my caution.
Yeah, sometimes it takes a bit of time to come through. But I'm listening to you and I'm thinking about what happened during lockdown, how there were businesses and restaurants that refused to abide by the lockdown restrictions. Or there was the NHS app in the UK which showed whether you had the injection or not. And some clever wags created a dummy app that looked exactly like the NHS app that people could then use to get past the restrictions. Then if you tried to go into it, it took you to a legitimate looking 404 page saying, oh, it's temporarily down. So you could never verify anything, but you could get about. And then, Alex, your story about what happened on the beaches in somewhere in France or wherever it was, where, they had all these...
yes, that was amazing. That was so beautiful to see.
People just stopped. Now what we have decentralized communication systems. BitChute is banned in the UK. Well, okay, switch on a VPN. RT is banned in the UK. Okay, we'll switch on a VPN. Rumble is banned in France. Okay, well, switch on a VPN and off you go. And if you can't use a centralized VPN, well, there are decentralized VPNs like Sentinel.co, right? That can't shut it down. And then there's 3speak.tv, which is a decentralized vlogging platform. So there's all sorts. So now, everybody watching this, please share this far and wide, because we have to spread this conversation. We have to share intelligent, insightful analysis. I think the three of us, we don't say we have the answers. We might think we have, right? But we're willing to engage and discuss. I've had twice on my channel somebody from Rejoin EU. It was a good civil conversation each time.
Well.
All right, Alex, Harley, absolute pleasure. An insightful, educational pleasure. Thank you so much. I look forward to having you on again next month. And then, Alex, this is the Crypto Rich and the Alex Naked Hedgie show. All right. Everybody, please go and follow them. Share this far and wide. Comment, like, subscribe. And between now and when I see you next, fill your hearts with love and freedom. Alex, Harley, and Rich signing out. All the best. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much. All the best. Bye-bye.
You can keep up with Alex Krainer's extraordinary analysis and writing at his Substack, and also make money using his trend-following strategy. To find out more, go to bit.ly/CryptoRichAlexK. bit.ly/CryptoRichAlexK. Keep up with Harley Schlanger's insightful analysis on macro politics at larouche.org. Link in the description below.